The air in the town square of Redemption Gulch is thick with the scent of roasted corn, gingham, and anticipation. It hangs heavy, a collective breath held by every soul gathered for the Founders' Day picnic. At the center of this unspoken tension stands Elias Thorne, a man carved from the same granite as the mountains that shadowed his sprawling ranch. He is wealthy, yes, but it is his silence that holds the town in thrall, a quiet integrity that makes him both respected and unknowable. And today, the town expects that silence to be broken. Before him, Isabella Fairchild is a vision crafted from sunlight and lace, the undisputed jewel of Redemption Gulch. Her laughter is like wind chimes, her smile a carefully practiced art. She places a delicate hand on Elias's arm, her touch proprietary, her blue eyes shimmering with a confidence that borders on command. "Elias," she says, her voice carrying just enough for the nearest circle of gossips to hear. "Papa has been saying it's high time we solidified the joining of our families. The Thorne and Fairchild names, together." She leaves the rest unsaid, a perfect, gleaming invitation. The town holds its breath tighter. This is the moment. The union of the town's greatest fortune and its greatest beauty. Elias looks at her hand on his arm, then into her flawless face. He sees the calculation there, the ambition that glitters brighter than any genuine warmth. He has seen it for years. A deep weariness settles in his bones, a distaste for this well-rehearsed play. He gently, but unmistakably, removes her hand from his sleeve. His voice, when it comes, is low and steady, yet it cuts through the festive hum like a winter wind. "I'm afraid your father's plans are not my own, Isabella." A collective gasp ripples through the crowd. Isabella's smile freezes, a brittle, cracking thing. Her cheeks flush, a tide of furious crimson. Humiliation, sharp and public, contorts her perfect features. But Elias is no longer looking at her. His gaze sweeps over the stunned faces, past the rows of eligible daughters pushed forward by their hopeful mothers, past the smug smiles of the town councilman. He looks past it all, to the far edge of the green, under the shade of a lonely cottonwood. There sits Alara Vance. She is a creature of shadow and stillness in this bright, loud place. Her brown dress is patched but impeccably clean, her hair pulled back in a simple, severe knot. She is not part of the celebration. She is merely adjacent to it, a forgotten postscript. A faded scar, a silvery crescent, traces the line of her cheekbone, a permanent mark of some past sorrow. She is mending a small boy's fallen kite, her fingers moving with a deft, quiet competence, her head bowed in concentration, entirely unaware that she has become the focus of every eye in town. He looked past the perfect smile of Isabella Fairchild, past the hopeful eyes of a dozen other girls, and with a quiet resolve that silenced the entire town square, he walked toward the one woman everyone else pretended not to see. There's more to this character than meets the eye. Before their true worth or secret comes to light, tell us, have you ever misjudged someone only to be surprised? And if you love a story of hidden depths, hit like and subscribe. The grass seemed to part for him. The murmuring ceased, replaced by a thick, incredulous silence. Each step he took was a drumbeat marking a profound shift in the town's rigid order. He was walking away from power, from beauty, from expectation, and toward nothing, toward the outcast, the gambler's daughter, the scarred, silent woman who was more ghost than citizen in Redemption Gulch. Alara finally looked up, her work on the kite interrupted by the sudden eclipse of the sun as Elias's tall frame cast a shadow over her. Her eyes, a startlingly clear shade of gray, widened in confusion, a flicker of alarm in their depths. She was a stray cat, accustomed to being shooed away, not approached. Elias stopped before her. He held out a tin cup of lemonade he'd picked up from a stall along the way. "It's a hot day," he said, his voice as calm as if he were discussing the weather with his foreman. "Thought you might be thirsty." Alara stared at the cup, then at his face. She saw no mockery there, no trick, only a quiet sincerity that was more unnerving than any insult. Her fingers, calloused from needlework, hesitated before taking the cup. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice rusty from disuse. "I never learned to dance," Elias said, his gaze steady. "But a man from the church told me it's polite to ask. Would you take a walk with me, Miss Vance?" The silence from the town square was now a roar. Isabella Fairchild's face was a mask of pure venom. Her father, the mayor, looked as if he'd swallowed a hornet. By asking the outcast for a walk, Elias Thorne had done more than reject the town beauty. He had thrown a gauntlet at the feet of the entire town. And with a hesitant, disbelieving nod, Alara Vance, the woman no man desired, picked it up. The walk was a short, stiff affair around the perimeter of the green. They didn't speak much. The weight of 100 pairs of eyes followed them, stripping the moment of any ease. Elias pointed out a hawk circling high above, and Alara commented on the quality of the soil near the creek bed. They were simple, safe observations, two strangers building a flimsy fence of words against a hostile world. For Alara, the experience was surreal. To be seen, to be acknowledged by a man like Elias Thorne, felt like a dream from which she would soon wake. For Elias, it was a confirmation. In her quiet dignity, in the way she met his eyes without flirtation or fear, he saw the substance he had found so lacking in everyone else. When he walked her back to her solitary spot beneath the tree, he simply tipped his hat. "Thank you for the company, Miss Vance." Then he turned and left the picnic, alone, leaving a firestorm of gossip in his wake. Elias Thorne's world was the Thorne Crest Ranch, a vast expanse of land that was both his kingdom and his sanctuary. His father had left him a good piece of property, but it was Elias's own sweat, foresight, and relentless work that had turned it into the most prosperous ranch in the territory. He understood the language of cattle, the moods of the sky, and the unforgiving calculus of profit and loss. He did not, however, understand the petty cruelties of people. His late wife, Sarah, had understood them. She had been a gentle soul who had seen the good in everyone, a trait that Elias had loved, but that had ultimately left her vulnerable to the town's casual malice. After she'd passed from fever 5 years ago, the house had grown silent, and so had Elias. The loneliness was a physical presence, a constant companion in the large, echoing rooms. He'd watched the town's eligible women and their mothers circle him like buzzards, their intentions as transparent as glass, and his solitude had felt preferable to their cloying ambition. Alara Vance's world was a 2-room cabin at the very edge of town, where the respectable road crumbled into a dusty track. Her father, a man who dreamed of gold and found only whiskey, had left her with nothing but debts and a tarnished name. She survived on her skill with a needle, mending shirts for ranchers and stitching dresses for women who would barely meet her eyes when they paid her. She was a fixture of the town's landscape, like an old, weathered fence post, noticed only when someone needed something from her, and otherwise ignored. The scar on her cheek was from a childhood fall, a long-ago accident, but the town had woven its own stories around it, whispers of a drunken brawl or a mark of shame. She bore their scorn with a quiet, unyielding pride. She asked for nothing, which, in a town that thrived on charity and obligation, was her greatest sin. They called it aloofness. Elias saw it as strength. His actions at the picnic had shattered her fragile peace. Before, she was invisible. Now, she was a spectacle. When she went to the general store, conversations would halt, followed by snickers. Children who once brought her broken toys to fix were now pulled away by their mothers, who cast dark, suspicious glances her way. She was no longer just the gambler's daughter. She was the strange woman who had somehow bewitched Elias Thorne. Her isolation, once a passive state, had become an active, aggressive siege. 3 days after the picnic, Elias rode into town, not on his usual business, but with a singular purpose. He bypassed the saloon and the mercantile, reining his horse in directly before her small cabin. He dismounted, his footsteps heavy on the dusty ground. He didn't knock. He simply stood on her porch and waited, knowing she would have heard his approach. The door opened a crack. Alara's gray eyes peered out, wary and guarded. "Mr. Thorne." "Miss Vance," he acknowledged with a nod. "May I have a word?" She opened the door wider, but did not invite him in. She stood on the threshold, a silent guardian of her tiny, private world. Elias took off his hat, holding it in his hands. He had rehearsed a dozen different speeches on the ride over, all of them feeling false and clumsy. He settled on the truth, plain and unvarnished. "I have a proposition for you," he began, his voice direct. "My home is large and empty. I have need of a wife to manage it, to bring some order to the place. I am tired of the town's expectations, he looked her straight in the eye. I am offering you a marriage of convenience. My name, my home, my protection, you would want for nothing. In return, I would ask for your companionship and your skills in running a household. It would be a partnership, a business arrangement. Alara's expression was unreadable, a mask of stone. She had expected an apology for the trouble he had caused her, perhaps a clumsy attempt at courtship. She had not expected this. A business arrangement. He was offering to buy her, just as he would buy a prize bull or a new wagon. The old, familiar shame and a fresh, hot anger warred within her. "And what makes you think I am for sale, Mr. Thorne?" she asked, her voice dangerously quiet. He deserved that. He knew he did. "That's not how I meant it," he said, his own voice tight with frustration at his own clumsiness. "I mean to offer you a way out. I see how they treat you. I saw it long before the picnic. I respect you, Miss Vance. I respect your fortitude. I see a strength in you that is truer than any I've seen in this town. This isn't charity. It is an alliance. Against them." Her pride was a fortress, the only thing she had ever truly owned. To accept his offer felt like a surrender. "I thank you for your unusual offer," she said, the words stiff. "But I am not in need of an alliance. I can manage on my own." She closed the door in his face, leaving him standing on the porch with his hat in his hands and the weight of his failures settling upon him. He had thought to offer her a lifeline, but he had only managed to insult her. Isabella Fairchild was not a woman to accept defeat gracefully. Her public humiliation festered, turning into a cold, calculated campaign of revenge. And in a town where her father was the mayor, her weapons were plentiful. A week after Alara's refusal, a notice was posted on her cabin door. A town ordinance, long forgotten but suddenly enforced by Mayor Fairchild, declared her dwelling structurally unsound due to a leaking roof and unstable foundation. She was given 30 days to make the necessary repairs she could never afford, or face eviction. The next day, when she went to the mercantile to purchase thread for a commission, Mr. Henderson, a man who had always been civil, suddenly refused to extend her the small line of credit she relied upon. He wouldn't meet her eye, mumbling something about new store policy, but she saw Mayor Fairchild's portly shadow leaving through the back room. The message was clear. Her livelihood was being choked, strand by strand. The commissions dried up. No one wanted to be seen doing business with the woman who had offended the Fairchilds and was about to be homeless. Her quiet, precarious existence was crumbling. Elias saw it all. His foreman, a grizzled man named Jed, kept him informed of the town's whispers. He learned of the eviction notice, of the denied credit. His anger was a slow, hot burn. This was not just Isabella's petulance. It was the town's complicity. He acted quietly. He sent one of his ranch hands, a young man with a kind face, to pay off Alara's account at the store, insisting on anonymity. The next morning, he loaded a wagon with a crate of vegetables from his garden, sacks of flour and beans, and a freshly butchered side of beef. He drove it to her cabin himself. She met him at the door, her face thinner, her eyes shadowed with worry. She saw the provisions in his wagon, and her back stiffened. "I am not a charity case, Mr. Thorne. This is not charity," he said, his voice firm but gentle. "It's surplus. My cook made too much. It will spoil if someone doesn't take it. It would be a favor to me." It was a lie, and they both knew it. But it was a lie that preserved a sliver of her pride. She hesitated, the gnawing hunger in her belly warring with the iron will that had sustained her for so long. Finally, she gave a single, curt nod. As he helped her unload the supplies, the sky, which had been a hazy gray all morning, opened up. Rain fell in thick, driving sheets, turning the dusty track to mud in an instant. It was a summer squall, violent and sudden. "You'd best come inside," Alara said, her voice resigned. "You'll be soaked through." Her cabin was tiny, but it was a testament to her character. Everything was spotless. The worn wooden floor was scrubbed clean. A quilt with 1,000 tiny, perfect stitches covered her narrow bed, and a single book lay on a small table. For hours, the storm raged outside, trapping them in the small space. The awkwardness between them slowly dissolved, washed away by the relentless drumming of the rain. They didn't speak of his proposal or her troubles. Instead, he asked about the book, a collection of poems, and was surprised by her thoughtful and intelligent answers. She asked about his ranch, not the finances, but the animals, the land itself. She listened as he spoke of a particular mare he was fond of the challenges of a late frost. In the dim light of her cabin, he saw past the town's caricature. He saw a sharp mind, a resilient spirit, and a profound loneliness that mirrored his own. She, in turn, saw the weariness in his eyes, the burden of responsibility he carried, and a gentleness in the way he spoke of his horses that belied his formidable reputation. For the first time, she saw the man, not the legend. When the storm finally broke, leaving the world washed clean and smelling of wet earth, a fragile truce had formed between them. He left without another word about his offer, but the question hung in the air, changed now. It was no longer just a business proposition. 2 weeks later, the eviction notice loomed. Her options had narrowed to nothing. She had no work, no money, and nowhere to go. To stay meant starvation and homelessness. To leave meant walking into the wilderness with nothing but the clothes on her back. Her pride, which had been her shield and armor, was now a cage. That evening, she looked at her reflection in a small, cracked mirror. She saw the scar, the tired eyes, the grim set of her mouth. The town had already decided who she was. Perhaps it was time to be someone else. The next morning, she put on her best dress, the same patch brown one, and walked the 5 miles to the Thorncrest Ranch. The walk was long, the sun hot on her back. When she arrived, her feet were dusty and her resolve was a brittle thing. The ranch house was immense, a 2-story structure of stone and dark wood that looked more like a fortress than a home. It intimidated her, but she did not turn back. Elias was in the corral, working with a young colt. He saw her approach and stopped, his expression unreadable. He walked to the fence, wiping the sweat from his brow with the back of his glove. "Miss Vance," he said, his voice neutral. She didn't waste time on pleasantries. "I have reconsidered your proposal, Mr. Thorne." Her voice was steady, though her heart hammered against her ribs. "I will accept it, but I have terms." He listened, his eyes never leaving her face. "This will be a partnership, as you said," she continued, drawing strength from his stillness. "I will not be a dependent. I will be the mistress of your house in truth. I will manage the household accounts, oversee the staff, and earn my keep. I will not be your charity case. I will be your wife." A slow smile touched Elias's lips, the first genuine smile she had ever seen from him. It transformed his stern face, making him look younger, less burdened. "Those terms are more than acceptable, Alara." He used her first name for the first time, and it sounded like a promise. Their wedding was not an event. It was a transaction conducted in the dusty, sun-drenched office of Judge Miller. The only witnesses were Jed, Elias's foreman, and the judge's clerk. Alara wore her brown dress. Elias wore his usual work clothes, having come straight from the fields. They spoke the required words, signed the required papers, and just like that, Alara Vance, the outcast, ceased to exist. In her place stood Alara Thorne, a name that felt foreign and heavy on her tongue. The news hit Redemption Gulch like a lightning strike on a dry prairie. The town was aghast, then furious. It was an insult, a deliberate flouting of all social order. Isabella Fairchild reportedly smashed a set of porcelain vases, her rage a thing of legend. Mayor Fairchild's face was a permanent thundercloud. Alara, now the mistress of the Thorn Crest, was more isolated than ever, a queen in a gilded cage, cut off from the town that had despised her and now despised her even more. The Thorn Crest Ranch house was as vast and silent as Elias himself. It was a man's house, filled with dark leather, heavy wood, and the ghosts of a life lived before her. The first few weeks were a study in awkwardness. They were husband and wife in name only, 2 strangers orbiting each other in the cavernous space. They ate their meals in a formal dining room large enough to host the entire town council, the silence between them amplified by the sheer distance. But Alara was a woman forged in hardship, and she would not be defeated by an unwelcoming house. She had agreed to be its mistress, and she would honor her word. She began, slowly, to make it a home. She opened the heavy curtains, letting sunlight spill onto the dusty floors. She found linens locked away in cedar chests and aired them out. She discovered a neglected cutting garden behind the house and began to tend it, her hands finding solace in the familiar soil. Soon, small vases of wildflowers began to appear on the tables and windowsills, tiny splashes of color in the overwhelming monochrome. Elias watched it all from a distance. He saw the changes, felt the subtle shift in the atmosphere of his home. The air felt lighter, the silence less oppressive. One evening, instead of taking his meal in his study, as was his habit, he sat down at the dining table across from her. He commented on the flowers. She told him about the garden. The conversation was stilted, but it was a start. True to her word, Alara asked to see the household ledgers. Elias, intrigued, gave them to her. He expected her to look at the grocery bills and the cook's wages. Instead, she spent days poring over every entry, her brow furrowed in concentration. One night, she approached him in his study, a ledger open in her hands. "Mr. Thorne," she began, falling back into the formal address. "Elias," he corrected her gently. "Elias," she repeated, the name still feeling strange. "This feed supplier you use, the one from Millstone, his invoices don't add up. He's been overcharging you by 10% for the last 6 months." She pointed to a series of figures, her finger tracing the evidence of the deception. Elias looked at the numbers, then at her. He was stunned. He was a shrewd businessman, but he had missed this. She, with her meticulous eye and sharp mind, had found it in a matter of days. It wasn't a fortune, but it was a significant amount of money, and more than that, it was a betrayal he hadn't seen. "I'll be damned," he murmured, a newfound respect dawning in his eyes. He looked at her not as the outcast he had rescued, but as a partner, an equal. "Thank you, Alara." From that day on, something fundamental shifted between them. He started bringing her all the ranch's books. They would spend their evenings in his study, heads bent together over the ledgers, the scent of his leather-bound books and her subtle wildflower perfume mingling in the lamplit air. He discovered she had a natural aptitude for numbers and strategy. She discovered he had a deep, abiding love for his land and a fierce sense of justice for his men. They began to talk, truly talk, sharing stories of their pasts, their quiet hopes for the future. The vast, empty house began to feel smaller, warmer. It began to feel like a shared space. The marriage of convenience was, slowly and imperceptibly, becoming something more. Mayor Fairchild could not abide the new reality. Elias Thorne, the town's most powerful citizen, had not only spurned his daughter but had elevated the town pariah to a position of status. It was a personal and political affront. Pushed by the venomous whispers of Isabella, he decided to break Elias. His chosen weapon was the lifeblood of the Thorn crest, water. He unearthed an archaic territorial charter and, twisting its language, declared that the creek Elias relied upon for his herds was improperly zoned. He announced a plan to divert a significant portion of its flow to a new, town-sponsored irrigation project, a project that existed only on paper, a pretense to ruin his new son-in-law. It was a death sentence for the ranch. Without that water, the Thorn crest would wither and die within a season. The town knew it was a spiteful, unjust power play, but Fairchild held their loans, their business licenses, their futures in his pudgy hands. Fear ensured their silence. A town meeting was called to ratify the mayor's emergency water reclamation plan. It was a public execution, and the whole town was being forced to watch. The night before the meeting, the air in the Thorn house was thick with tension. Elias sat in his study, staring at maps and deeds, his jaw set like stone. He was preparing for a fight he knew he would likely lose. Public opinion, cowed by the mayor, was not on his side. Alara entered the study quietly, placing a cup of coffee on his desk. She had watched him for hours, had seen the grim lines deepen around his eyes. "There is no legal basis for his claim," she said softly. Elias looked up, surprised. "How do you know?" "I read the original town charters," she replied, gesturing to a stack of dusty books she had retrieved from the courthouse archives herself. "And I cross-referenced them with your deeds and the territorial water rights filings. The mayor's claim is based on a clause that was superseded in 72. He is counting on no one else having read them." She laid out several documents on his desk, her finger tracing the relevant passages. Her research was flawless, her logic impeccable. He stared at her, a wave of profound admiration washing over him. She was not just his wife, she was his ally, his partner in every sense of the word. He reached across the desk and took her hand. "We will face him together." The town hall was packed, the air stifling with heat and morbid curiosity. Mayor Fairchild stood at the podium, pompous and sweating, laying out his fraudulent case with feigned civic concern. Isabella sat in the front row, a smug, triumphant smile on her face. Elias and Alara sat together, a quiet island in a sea of anxious faces. When the mayor finished, he called for a vote. Before anyone could second the motion, Elias stood. "Before we vote on ruining the largest employer in this county," he said, his voice ringing with authority, "my wife has something to say." A murmur went through the crowd. All eyes turned to Alara as she walked to the podium. She looked small and unassuming, but when she spoke, her voice was clear and steady, devoid of fear. She did not raise her voice. She did not plead. She simply stated the facts. She laid out the history of the water rights, citing charters, dates, and statutes from memory. She calmly and methodically dismantled the mayor's entire argument, exposing it not as a legal matter, but as a petty, personal vendetta. She held up the documents for all to see. "The only emergency here, Mayor Fairchild," she concluded, her gray eyes locking with his, "is your own wounded pride." The hall was utterly silent. The truth, laid bare so plainly, was undeniable. Then, from the back, an old rancher named Silas Croft, a man who had also been bullied by Fairchild, stood up. "She's right," he boomed. "Fairchild tried the same thing with my grazing rights last year." Another man stood, then another, each with a story of the mayor's overreach and intimidation. The tide had turned. The fear that had held the town in thrall was broken, washed away by the courage of one woman whom they had all scorned. Mayor Fairchild sputtered, his face purple with rage, but his power had evaporated. He was exposed, a tyrant with no clothes. Elias walked to the podium and stood beside Alara, placing a protective, proud hand on the small of her back. He looked at the defeated faces of the mayor and his daughter, then he looked at the townsfolk, his gaze sweeping over them. But his final look was for his wife. It was a look of such profound love and gratitude that it silenced any remaining doubt. "This," he said, his voice resonating with emotion, "is Mrs. Thorne, the mistress of my ranch and the keeper of my heart. Her word, as you now know, is as good as my own." He led her from the podium, and the people parted for them, their faces a mixture of awe and shame. They had not just won a legal battle, they had won a moral victory for the entire town. That evening, the setting sun painted the vast sky in hues of orange and rose, casting a golden glow over the Thorn crest. The tension of the day had dissipated, leaving behind a deep, quiet peace. Elias found Alara in the garden she had brought back to life, kneeling in the soft earth, tending to her flowers. He stood for a long moment, simply watching her, this incredible woman who had faced down a tyrant with nothing but her intellect and her integrity. He knelt beside her. "Thank you," he said, the words feeling utterly inadequate. She looked up, her face smudged with dirt, and smiled a real, unguarded smile. "It was our home they were threatening, Elias. I was simply protecting our home." He reached out, his calloused thumb gently tracing the silvery line of the scar on her cheek. He had seen it 100 times, but now he saw it differently. It was not a mark of shame or a flaw. It was a part of her story, a testament to her survival, a part of the woman he had come to love with a depth that startled him. "When I made my proposal," he said, his voice thick with emotion, "I told you it was a partnership. That was the truth, but it wasn't the whole truth. I saw you at that picnic, so alone, so dignified in the face of their scorn, and I saw everything I had ever valued. Strength, honor, a quiet heart. I didn't just want to offer you my name for protection, Alara. I wanted you. I think I was falling in love with you even then." Tears welled in her gray eyes, making them shine like polished stones. "And I," she whispered, her voice trembling slightly, "accepted your proposal to survive. But I stayed because I found a man whose kindness was quieter than the insults of the town, but 1,000 times more powerful. In this house, I found a home. And in your heart, I found a place I never thought existed for me. I love you, Elias." He leaned in and kissed her, a kiss that was not about passion or possession, but about a profound and mutual recognition. It was a sealing of their true union, a promise made not before a judge, but under the wide-open sky, witnessed only by the mountains that had stood sentinel over his family for generations. They stood up together, hand in hand, and looked out over the sprawling lands of the Thorn Crest. It was no longer his ranch or her sanctuary. It was their future, a shared horizon, stretching out before them, vast and full of promise. The rich cowboy and the town outcast, finally home. Thanks for watching. If you believe in compassion, overcoming prejudice, and finding love in unexpected places, give this story a like and subscribe for more. Her true worth was finally seen. What does true value in a person mean to you? Tell us below.